A muddled definition will harm millions of patients for decades.
You are hurtling down the psychological rabbit hole, repeating the Gulf War illness anti-science debacle.
Given its clear bias, the IOM must recuse itself.
This first meeting is a culmination of a year-long effort at HHS to support development of clinical diagnostic criteria for myalgic encephalomyelitis and chronic fatigue syndrome. In 2012, the Chronic Fatigue Syndrome Advisory Committee, or CFSAC, recommended to the Secretary of HHS that she convene a workshop to reach a consensus for research and clinical case definitions for ME/CFS. Because of the considerable need for faster and more accurate diagnosis for patients, HHS asked the IOM to use its well-established and well-regarded consensus process to provide guidance to the broader medical community on how to identify and diagnose ME/CFS in the clinical setting.
What is so upsetting to the patient community is that in November 2012, CFSAC, and I'm a member of that committee, we made a recommendation, and I helped craft the language of that recommendation, and we wanted to convene a workshop with only ME/CFS experts, meaning researchers, clinicians, and patients, to reach a consensus on a research and clinical case definition, starting with the Canadian consensus criteria. We basically wanted to just endorse that criteria. And what happened after that was outrageous, because in our subcommittees, contention at the highest level. I chair one of the subcommittees, and I don't want to get into the ugly realities of what was going on behind the scenes, but it was so ugly that anyone who spoke out, and I was one of them, got calls from the government. And we were intimidated, and we were threatened with eviction off the committee, and there is an ongoing investigation about it. It directly relates to the case definition recommendation we made. We are the experts making the recommendation, and the government is not taking our recommendation. They're hijacking it, making it their own, and not using all experts like we asked.
So that the government can write off the ME epidemic of 17 million souls worldwide, 1 million in the US, the same number with HIV/AIDS.
They're going to do the same thing that VA IOM did to Gulf War veterans by giving them a new name, chronic multi-symptom illness.
Patients believe that the IOM will devise a name worse than chronic fatigue syndrome, something like chronic multi-symptom illness, the meaningless moniker the government and IOM use for Gulf War syndrome.
By saying the best clinical practices for that disease is CBT, GET, and antidepressants.
On the IOM website, a curious diagram that I handed out that accompanies an article by Dr. Daniel Claw lists several diseases, Gulf War syndrome, fibromyalgia, and CFS among them, all covered under the big umbrella of somatoform disorders, psychiatric ailments that just look like physical diseases.
And that study that came out in January was very alarming because it had a section on ME/CFS. And in that section, it said the same clinical practices, GET, CBT, and antidepressants would be used for ME/CFS. So we don't know how this new panel could possibly contradict the earlier findings of the IOM study. I simply don't know how that would work. The majority of stakeholders oppose the contract for many reasons, and it's evidenced by the letter and call campaigns, Twitter campaigns, the congressional calls and meetings. The 2 petitions.
We were at 5,002 signatures.
Demonstrations.
Patients demand, experts demand, advocates demand no IOM definition.
Media interviews. legal actions.
The IOM has a fatal organizational conflict of interest, and I have filed a complaint with the Office of the Inspector General. A formal investigation is underway.
Freedom of Information Acts.
HHS has broken federal law as to FOIA compliance. 2.5 weeks ago, I filed a lawsuit against HHS and NIH in U.S. District Court.
The advocate's letter signed by 171 advocates, and the MECFS expert letter.
HHS hijacked the federal CivSec recommendation and ignored an unprecedented and impassioned request by 50 international ME experts to cease and desist.